Imagine this. You enter a hall where everyone hides their true face behind a mask. Some are smiling, others seem sullen, but no one is showing genuine emotion. Now imagine that you enter this world without a mask, without a shadow of deception, without falsity, and without even the slightest intention to manipulate others. How long do you think you will be able to last? How soon will you be seen as naive, simple-minded, or even vulnerable? This is the tragic fate that befell Prince Mishkin, the central character in The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky. He is the epitome of purity of heart, unwavering sincerity, and boundless mercy. However, instead of being admired for these virtues, he is ridiculed, manipulated, and ultimately broken by a society unable to comprehend his goodness. But this is not just a narrative rooted in 19th century Russia. It is a mirror reflecting a bitter truth about human nature that has not lost its relevance to this day. Why does it so often happen that good people find themselves in a vulnerable position in this world? You will find out the answer to this question by watching to the end. Why do openness and directness often meet ironic sneers instead of deserved honor? And if the pursuit of goodness turns into suffering, are such efforts justified? In the course of this reflection, the reader will gain new insights into the concepts of virtue, moral principles, and the hidden dangers of excessive kindness in a world where dexterity and cunning are valued far more highly. The final realization we come to may be the most unexpected and make us rethink not only the surrounding reality but also our own place in it. To understand why sincerity is sometimes perceived as naivety, it is necessary to understand what modern society actually values. It is generally believed that honesty, kindness, and decency are universally admired, but is it really so? Or do we simply tolerate these qualities as long as they do not conflict with our personal interests? History shows that those who have reached the pinnacle of power have rarely been characterized by impeccable virtue. As a rule, they are those who skillfully maneuver in the complex intricacies of human relationships, who know when to be ruthless and when to be charming, who are able to hide their true intentions behind a skillfully created mask. In his treatise The Sovereign, Niccolò Machiavelli put forward the thesis that a sovereign striving for success should be ready to discard moral principles, if circumstances demand it, because in the real world, success accompanies not virtue, but performance. It is this idea that sheds light on the tragic fate of Prince Mishkin, the hero of Dostoevsky's novel. Mishkin, by virtue of his character, is unable to accept or understand the laws of the society in which he finds himself. He is a stranger to intrigue and deceit, and more importantly, unwilling to resort to them. This makes him an idiot in the eyes of others, but not because of his lack of intelligence, but because his genuine kindness makes him defenseless in a world dominated by competition and the pursuit of personal gain. In real life, we often encounter situations where kindness and honesty turn against a person. Stories of trusting and responsive people being betrayed by those to whom they opened their hearts are heard everywhere. Many of us have experienced bitter disappointment when our faith in the best in people turns out to be naive. Of course, it cannot be said that the world is mired in total corruption, but it is clear that survival in it sometimes requires a certain amount of cunning and the ability to stand up for oneself. Even those who sincerely believe themselves to be paragons of virtue are sometimes forced to compromise their principles in order to protect themselves from adversity. And yet, despite this, deep down, we long to see around us such personalities as Prince Mishkin, whose kindness is unwavering and pure. But here is where the real intrigue unfolds. Dostoevsky does not portray his hero as a mere sufferer who accepts the blows of fate without complaint. Mishkin not only endures hardships, but also becomes a catalyst that forces those around him to look deep inside themselves, often causing them confusion and discomfort. His kindness, being active and engaged, is like a mirror, reflecting their own flaws and vices. This is what makes many feel uncomfortable in his presence. He does not pass judgment, but his very existence exposes their hypocrisy. His sincerity highlights their lies and deceit, and his selflessness makes their selfishness even more obvious. And so, instead of being accepted by society, he finds himself rejected. All of this brings us to the key question. Who ends up being the madman, Mishkin himself or the world around him, mired in sin and delusion? In what follows, we will continue our exploration of this paradox and try to understand what it really means to be good in a world that seems to have lost the value of this quality. Ultimately, the veil of mystery over the true nature of kindness will be torn away, which has the potential to radically transform the perception of the world. The tragedy of Mishkin's fate stems not only from his personal suffering, but also from the attitude of those around him to his personality. He does not consider himself insane. On the contrary, he unwaveringly believes in the power of love, the principles of honesty, and the inherent goodness of human nature. However, paradoxically, the more actively he strives to bring light and warmth into the lives of others, the more he is perceived as an outsider, an element alien to their familiar world. A legitimate question arises. Why does the manifestation of sincere kindness so often causes a feeling of awkwardness and rejection? To answer this question, it is necessary to carefully analyze the mechanisms of human interaction. Interpersonal relations, both in the private and public spheres, are built on a precarious balance of power. Even in the most fleeting contacts, unspoken bargains unfold beneath the outer shell. People carefully consider every word, strategically plan their actions, and adjust their behavior based on expectations of a response. This is a complex world of subtle manipulation, where even kindness is often conditioned by a hidden expectation of reciprocity. Prince Mishkin refuses to follow conventional rules. He gives kindness unselfishly, pours out his soul with candor, not caring about the reaction of others. He forgives offenses without remembering evil, even if he is betrayed again and again. In a world of hypocrisy and falsity, he appears as a defenseless child. And it is this genuineness that makes people suspicious. It is not for nothing that psychologists have drawn attention to the phenomenon of cognitive dissonance, that agonizing discomfort that arises when confronted with information or actions that contradict our beliefs. Communicating with Mishkin puts people in front of a mirror of their own moral compromises. They may hypocritically praise goodness, but when confronted with its true embodiment, they feel exposed. It's a painful realization of their own non-ideality. And instead of accepting this uncomfortable truth, they push away the person who exposes it. It's worth considering how often we shun those who seem too good for us. When we admire stories about heroes whose lives are devoted to serving their neighbors, we often feel inexplicably uncomfortable. Subconsciously seeking to distance ourselves from their exploits, we tend to explain their selflessness by some special characteristic that is not available to ordinary people, presenting their actions as something unrealistic and detached from life. Sometimes, in an effort to belittle their greatness, we look for flaws in their images, trying to find proof that their flawlessness is just a mask. The reason for this behavior lies in the fact that recognizing the true goodness of these people calls into question our own life guidelines, compromises, and moral attitudes. This is exactly what happens with the image of Mishkin created by Dostoevsky. He becomes the embodiment of an unattainable ideal, admired in theory, but rejected in practice. His very presence in society, without resorting to violence, but by his mere existence, disrupts the usual order of things. Dostoevsky, using the image of Mishkin, exposes a profound truth about human nature. We do not actually strive for absolute goodness in our lives. It seems to us that we desire it, but when we come face to face with it, we feel overwhelmed and even spiritually constrained. Selfless, all-encompassing kindness, devoid of human frailties, puts many people off balance. Instead of extolling the generous person, society often rejects him or her. The question arises, is kindness vain, and is it wrong to be good? Herein lies the difficulty. Despite his suffering, Prince Mishkin does not repent of his goodness, does not harden, and does not seek change. Dostoevsky brings him to an important realization. The value of kindness is not in its social recognition, but in its essential nature. True kindness does not need affirmation, admiration, or reward. It exists not because the world values it, but because it is the only right way. But a legitimate question arises. If kindness is so pure and powerful, why is it so often the cause of suffering? Why is it that the most worthy individuals seem to attract the greatest trials? Further research will present a final and perhaps most startling revelation about what it really means to be a person of high moral fiber in a world that often fails to do justice to kindness. It may well be that established perceptions will eventually have to be re-examined. If virtue really has such value, why does it attract suffering like a magnet? Why do those who are exceptionally honest, selfless, and compassionate often face betrayal, bitter disappointments, and difficult circumstances? This question is central to the novel The Idiot. Prince Mishkin, the protagonist, strives to bring the light of kindness and understanding to the world around him. However, instead of recognition and gratitude, he faces ridicule, misunderstanding, and ultimately a tragic end. But Dostoevsky does not portray this as a senseless tragedy. Rather, he encourages the reader to think more deeply about the nature of suffering itself. There is an inextricable link between showing kindness and the experience of suffering, and this relationship is the subject of study not only in literary works, but also in philosophical treatises, psychological studies, and even religious teachings. Throughout history, prominent individuals, whether spiritual leaders, social reformers, or great thinkers, have often been confronted with profound suffering. Jesus Christ, Socrates, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr. all dedicated their lives to the high ideals of justice, truth, and compassion. But unfortunately, obstacles, persecution, and in some cases violent death have come in their way. But why does this happen? Why does the world seem to reject kindness rather than embrace it with open arms? One possible explanation lies in the fact that true kindness has a destructive power. It challenges the established order of things, forcing people to face their own moral dilemmas. And most people, whether they realize it or not, do not seek to confront these contradictions. They prefer to go on with their lives, unwilling to analyze their selfishness, their compromises, and their willingness to put personal gain ahead of moral integrity. Consider Prince Mishkin, the hero of Dostoevsky's novel The Idiot. When he appears in the upper class of Russian society, he does not fit into its framework and structure. In a society where every individual obeys unspoken rules, weaves intrigues, and aspires to the heights of power, Prince Mishkin appears as an outlier. He does not participate in this complex game, which makes him a mystery to others, an inexplicable phenomenon. But what happens to those who do not fit into the system? They are either assimilated, forced into submission, or cast out. A prince who does not want to compromise his principles ends up being rejected. This tragic outcome raises a fundamental question. If kindness and compassion so often lead to suffering, is it worth being kind at all? Dostoevsky does not give a simple answer. He does not promise that virtue will be rewarded in earthly life. Instead, he offers a profound yet disturbing thought. The value of kindness does not depend on the world's reaction. In other words, kindness is self-valuable. It does not need recognition, love, or understanding. Kindness, in its true manifestation, does not seek success, universal recognition, or any external mark of distinction. It is self-valuable and exists solely for its own sake, because its value lies in its essence, to be good. This concept is difficult to grasp because it contradicts the conventional beliefs instilled in us from childhood. We are taught to look for validation of our actions, to measure them by the results achieved, and to expect a just reward for our efforts. True kindness, however, is not subject to these principles. It is not a bargain, it is not a question of personal gain, and it simply shows up as such. At the same time, a certain paradox arises. If kindness exists on its own, regardless of any rewards, does it have the real power to change the world around it? If it does not lead to success or influence, What is its purpose? This is perhaps the most difficult question that requires careful thought. After all, despite Prince Mishkin's suffering, he has an undeniable influence on those he encounters. Even those who reject him cannot simply forget about him. Even those who are prone to ridicule cannot escape the transformative impact of meeting this man. This demonstrates that kindness, though not always triumphant in the conventional sense, has a power whose depth, subtlety, and durability surpass our initial perceptions. But what is this power? And how does it shape the world, exerting an influence that is not always obvious? In the final part of our analysis, we will uncover a final truth about goodness that will force us to reconsider all our previous considerations and lead to a revelation that could forever change our perception of human nature. If goodness is not defined by its material fruits, then what is its true power? If the world rejects, ridicules, and even destroys those who are sincere in their kindness, why does it continue to exist? Why do personalities like Mishkin, seemingly so alien to a world ruled by ambition and personal gain, not disappear? The answer lies in something hard to see or measure. It lies in the quiet, often imperceptible ways in which sincere kindness changes those who come into contact with it. In the pages of The Idiot, Prince Mishkin does not appear to the reader as a reformer or a preacher seeking to reshape the world in his own image. He does not impose his own beliefs on those around him and does not try to forcibly change their life paths. Despite this, however, his presence has a profound effect on the fates of all those he comes in contact with. Even those who cause him suffering cannot remain indifferent to his luminous personality. Sincerity, compassion, and unwavering faith in human nature, inherent in Mishkin, act like a mirror, reflecting in people their most intimate and hidden traits. This is the mysterious power of true kindness. It does not force or demand, does not manipulate or impose, but only reveals the truth, existing as a given. Its very existence forces others to face themselves and their own nature. Some accept this challenge, opening up to the good, while others, unable to bear what they see, reject it. But no one remains the same after meeting the prince. It is worth thinking about those moments in the life of each of us, when we encountered manifestations of true kindness, unselfish and sincere, not demanding anything in return and without ulterior motives. Something small, almost imperceptible, can be deeply embedded in the memory, forcing a person to stop for a moment and rethink their own actions, established beliefs, and habitual way of life. That is why kindness, which is often mistaken for weakness, is actually one of the most powerful forces that exist in the world. It does not seek to dominate, but to influence. It does not confront, but to transform. It does not demand, but to inspire. This power, however, is not given for nothing. Fyodor Dostoevsky deeply understood that in a world where personal gain and the struggle for survival are paramount, those who truly embody kindness are often doomed to suffer. They may be misunderstood, they may be abused, and at times they may feel like strangers in this world. But the great writer also realized something even more important. The suffering of good people is not meaningless, nor is it a sign of their failure. On the contrary, it is a testament to their faithfulness to their principles in a world that is constantly trying to corrupt them. In the final pages of The Idiot, Prince Mishkin's fate seems to be predetermined. He is crushed by the ruthlessness and intricacies of the society around him. But a legitimate question arises. Was he really an idiot? Or, on the contrary, did he possess a unique ability to see the world in its true essence? Fyodor Dostoevsky does not offer an unambiguous answer, for such an answer simply does not exist in nature. Instead, he poses to the reader a question that everyone must answer for themselves, based on their own beliefs and life experience. What is preferable? To follow the accepted norms, to protect oneself from adversity, to participate in the social game, or to remain true to one's principles, even if it involves suffering? This dilemma sooner or later arises before every person, and its solution is by no means simple and has no clear boundaries. Perhaps the true value of a life lived is determined not by the amount of material wealth acquired, but by the light we have managed to bring into this world, even if this light seems insignificant and unnoticed. Ultimately, the bottom line is that kindness does not involve a mandatory reward, does not guarantee victory, and does not eliminate pain. True kindness is selfless and self-valuable. True kindness is shown not because of universal recognition, but because it is the only true moral guide. Ultimately, it does not matter how those around him perceive a person, as a naive simpleton or as a righteous person. It does not matter whether history preserves his name or forgets it, whether they appreciate his generosity or turn their backs on him. What matters is that he remains true to himself and his principles. In a world where lies and selfish motives often take over, the decision to remain kind against all odds becomes the most powerful and meaningful choice one can make. Thank you for your